If you go back to the founding of our nation, our second president was John Adams. Now, John Adams had a great deal to do with the Declaration of Independence. He had a lot to do with the Constitution. And you think about it, as president, he had a great deal of authority. Well, his wife Abigail, at one point in time, pointed out to him as the new government was being created, quote, "Don't forget the ladies," unquote. Meaning that what needed to be done was not just rights and everything for men, but also to include those rights for women. And the drawback was the ladies were forgotten. And it would take a considerable amount of time before there was one nationwide rule in regards to women and voting. That would finally come with the 19th Amendment, but sadly that wouldn't happen until after World War I. So for a few moments, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take a few minutes to talk about the fact that women finally won suffrage. Now remember, suffrage is the right to vote. At this point in time, there were various states that did allow women to vote. This was a state issue. But we're talking about the desire of the entire nation to be on the same page, shall we say. The idea was that women wanted suffrage nationwide. They wanted all women, regardless of where they lived in the nation, to have the right to vote. And while it did take a while, we did finally achieve that. Now, as I said, up until 1919, women's suffrage was really a state issue. Now, Wyoming, for example, they did allow women to vote as early as the 1860s. They were the first state to actually have a woman as governor. And so there was a lot of local and state issues that had come up. Granted, we are talking here about trying to win a nationwide right to suffrage, but we're really going to start off first and foremost talking about things at the local level. Okay? This is a nation that really does well with what's referred to as grassroots organizations. Okay, this is where you have lots of people at different areas around the country, but at the local level starting to work on various things. And this is a great way to actually change people's minds. Because in all honesty, what happens at the local level trickles to the state level, which then goes to the national level. So starting at the local level is a brilliant idea, because you're trying to convince your friends and neighbors. Okay, once you have all those on board, then you can start going through and trying to expand it to a state level and from there to a national level. Now, as far as local suffrage goes, you had organizations using door-to-door campaigns. Now, we've all seen this in political campaigns where you do have the people going from door to door, talking to individuals, explaining why their candidate is the best choice. Well, the same kind of thing was going on here. You had people going door to door, trying to explain to individuals in the various towns why giving women the right to vote was the proper thing to do. And in some cases, they met with great acceptance. In other cases, they met with great resistance. It just all depended. But it was the idea that you had what's known as a ground game. You had those people who were willing to go out and willing to talk to other people. Going door to door, talking to strangers about political issues is oftentimes not a very easy thing to do. And, sometimes you do get doors slammed in your face, and that happened in this case as well. But they began to make what are referred to as inroads. They began to start to change some minds. And the more minds they changed, the greater the possibility that changes would come. Now, some women adopted bolder tactics. You had, for example, women protesting out in front of the White House, chaining themselves to the White House fence, trying to get the attention necessary. There is the story of a woman in England. There is some debate about this, whether or not she was trying to hand the King of England a letter or a piece of paper in regards to women's suffrage, or whether or not she killed herself to try and bring attention to women's suffrage. Basically, she was trampled to death at a horse race. So there were those people, just as there are now, that are willing to really go out and do all they can for a particular political purpose. There are usually going to be more people who are willing to do smaller things, maybe sign put their signature on some kind of ballot measure or whatnot, or a petition rather, excuse me. And there are others that are willing to do much, much more. For example, you have CAT and the national movement. Now, CAT refers, of course, to Carrie Chapman Catt. Now, she succeeded Susan B. Anthony as president of NASA. Now, you're going to remember NASA, North American Women's Suffrage Association. Okay, this was a nationwide organization with the intent of getting women the right to vote. So they were going to go through, and they'd started this back with Susan B. Anthony and what have you, and now it's going to keep continuing. Okay, we're looking at getting into the 20th century, and Carrie Chapman Catt is going to take over. Now, she believed in continuing the tactics of the past. Okay, the slow, steady grind, the ability to eventually change enough people's minds that the right to vote would eventually arrive. Now, in this particular struggle to try and get suffrage for women, there were those who wanted to stay with the tried and true methods, okay? They saw that they had been making progress, that it was slow progress, but it was progress. And there were those who wanted to stick with those tactics, knowing that eventually they would reach a point that they would have the right to vote nationwide. The drawback is there are always those who are not patient. There are always those who are going to want change to come now. Now, you might remember when we were talking about Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois, that one was willing to go patiently to get equality, the other wanted equality right now. Well, the same thing is true here. You had people like Catt who were going through and they wanted to continue the slow progress, but there were others who wanted more radical tactics to be used, such as Lucy Burns and Alice Paul. Now, they formed the National Woman's Party, and they adopted more radical tactics. These were the individuals that would do things like chaining themselves to fences and stuff like that. These would be people that would be willing to go through. They would risk going to jail in order to do something that was going to get the public's attention. Okay, you can think of it as a publicity stunt or a media event today. But these were women that were willing to do a lot more. They were willing to take a lot more risks in the hope that it meant it would bring about the right to vote. And so this is going to be going on for a considerable amount of time. But what really brought women the right to vote? World War I. World War I really brought about suffrage for women because we had, and we'll talk about this when we get to World War I, we had a large number of men now drafted into the military. And as a result, there were a great number of jobs that had been done by men, and men exclusively up to that point in time, that now we needed other people to do it. So women were able to step up, and you hear about this like in World War II as well, with Rosie the Riveter. The idea that women were able to do some of the exact same jobs that men had, and as a result, more people saw that they were able to do the same thing. Why were they not getting the same rights? And so it was really World War I that pushed everything forward a lot more. In fact, it was in 1919 that Congress passed the 19th Amendment. Now, the 19th Amendment made it illegal to deny anyone the right to vote on the basis of sex. You could no longer have any kind of law in your state, in your town, your county, whatever. There could be no restriction on women having the right to vote. This is another step forward. Now, today we have universal suffrage for every citizen of the United States over the age of 18. Once you turn 18, if you are a U.S. citizen, you have the right to register to vote. But we didn't get there overnight. Okay, 1919, we're going to see women get the right to vote. So now we have essentially, at least on paper, universal suffrage for everyone over the age of 21. Men, women, didn't matter color and things like that. Drawback was there was still going to be a lot of resistance in the South. We talked about the literacy tests, for example. 1919, women get the right to vote. In 1920, It's the first presidential election in which women are able to exercise that right, and they show up in large numbers and vote. By 1924, however, not as many. It seems as if there had been this great push and this great desire to win the right to vote, and they did win that right to vote. And then once it was there, much like the rest of the nation, people took it for granted. But never forget, it was the 19th Amendment that did pave the way for women to finally be able to exercise their right to vote in U.S. elections.